Tonight, I want to try to bring a conclusion, a wrap up to the First Crusade. As we've seen, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I originally planned to encompass all the Crusades together in there, but that's not going to happen. And suffice it to say that even to properly do some justice to 1096, to the First Crusade itself, is a task. In the short version, we saw that we're talking about a time span of the summer, that's all. In the summer, May, June, July, this time of the year in the Rhineland, right? On those cities over there, here's the Rhine River. That's when all this happened. So it's like a storm. It came, it was furious, a cyclone as they called it, and then it left. And then they moved on elsewhere. There were a little bit of other things that happened a little bit afterwards, perhaps here and there in 1096, but it was over. But on the other hand, as is the case with a hurricane or a storm or a cyclone, there's utter devastation that it leaves in its wake. The Emperor Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, was in Italy at the time this happened, as I said before, and he rushed back in shock and anger. Now, he wasn't a liberal. This is the 11th century. But it's his property. And second of all, the Jews were under the peace of God, meaning they were supposed to be under the protection of law and order. And who's in charge of the law and order? The Kaiser, the emperor. And so you're breaking my law and order. And he was very angry at the people. Now, mind you, I tried to explain that in point of fact, it wasn't really the locals that did it. But on the other hand, it's not so simple either. Because once the whole mobs came in, the locals kind of joined very often. Not everywhere, but in most places, that's what happened. And that itself is a painful lesson to all of us today. That when riots and things like this break out, the next door neighbor and the people you think are nice people, and they are nice people, but circumstances can come together in such a way that ordinarily a regular good person gets swept along. We know what a mob mentality is, and we know what a looting mentality is, and that's the way it is. And that's why these things have to be nipped in the bud right off the bat at the top. You have to shoot the first guy, or else you unleash, as they say, the dogs of war. And that's, of course, what happened. And so what can the Kaiser do when he comes back, running back angrily over here? You can't kill out the whole cities of the Rhine. If everybody did, it's the old story of the school. If one boy did a violation, you can throw him out. If the whole high school did, what are you going to do? Right? So what is he going to do to everybody? So he rebuked them, this, that, and the other. The most he could do was try to make restitution. He was a funny guy. He had lifelong wars with all the nobles and all the popes and all the rest of it. But on the other hand, you see, he had he had a rough childhood. I told you, he became emperor at the age of 4, and people tried to poison him from day one. He grew up in that snake pit. But he had his, righteous side, or his just side. That might be a better word. And the Germans have the mentality, the better ones, what they call the Rechtsstaat. It's a state of law in which there's not lawlessness. And so he said like this, all the money has to be returned to the Jews. That did not happen. But he also said that, real estate property go back to the Jews. That did happen, whoever survived. And he, more importantly, I might say, he got the bishops together. And if you remember what I said last week, the archbishops were ambiguous. Some of them really did try to help the Jews and were really swept away by events. That usually is what happened over there. And so they all felt guilty over the outbreak of law that happened on their watch. And that's a good thing for the Jews, because what it meant was that now that the storm is over, they got together and had a church council, and they paskined the Shiloh that the Jews who had converted to Christianity under varieties of circumstances, it doesn't count, and they can go back to being Jewish with no penalty. So what you have after the First Crusade is the opposite of what happens in Spain, that I described, I think, last year, 2 years ago, after 1391. In Spain, there was huge mob violence all over the country, and thousands of Jews, tens of thousands of Jews actually, large numbers, were compelled by violence to convert to Christianity. Obviously, that doesn't count if you're talking about someone's conscience, but I don't know if the Middle Ages they thought in those terms. The idea is, you bow down to my idol, now you're on my team, And the Catholic Church at that time in Spain took the position that maybe it wasn't right, that maybe there wasn't something to do, but once they agreed to convert and they accepted the Trinity, then that's it. Once in, you're in. And that is not, and interestingly, that did not happen in Germany. The emperor was very strong about this, and so were some of to be fair about some of the archbishops, and they said they broke the law, you're not allowed to. Now, we want the Jews to convert, but not that way. And therefore, everybody can go back. And of course, many did. Now, we don't have numbers, and we don't have the details. We'd like to. And you can just imagine, as I always say hundreds of times over, anybody who needs material for novels or stories, in Jewish history, you have them by the thousands, because there are many unfollowed through trails. And just think of what I said before. Really, here we are in Erev Tisha B'Av. Think about somebody who lived in Mainz or Worms or one of these places. The whole doggone community, I'd say 90% got killed. But that means 10% didn't get killed. And now you come back to the shul, and the cemetery, and the property. And in those places, all the Jews were in an organized civil community, meaning you had something called the Kehillah, the Jewish community, which owned property. And now the 10% own the property because there's no one else. And how do you operate over here? These guys were Christians or hiding in a basement or something like that. It's a little bit probably like what happened immediately after the Second World War in Eastern Europe and some of these places, whereas we all know, Echad Me'ir Shnai Mishpacha, that whole towns were wiped out, except 2, 3, 4 people, and they came back, and they're surrounded by the Polacks or whatever they said, and what are you going to do? You see? And therefore, the situation was crazy. It was chaotic, but the Jews did come back to Judaism. On the other hand, this itself provoked all kinds of controversies. And that's one of the things I've talked about tonight, the halachic, spin-off of all this, the controversies, which I think is very fascinating. Basically, it has to do with the idea of what we call a mumar. And a mumar is an apostate. An apostate is somebody who converts to another religion. But the typical understanding of the term is somebody who converts to another religion. So in Judaism, as in Christianity, Islam, and every other religion, you're always going to have some spill-off. It does happen, and X number of Jews, not a lot, are going to convert and move to another way. X number of Christians are going to go Jewish, X number of Muslims, X number of Christians are going to go Muslims. There's always a little bit of traffic. But on the other hand, overall, the individual groups held their ground. That means that each individual religious group has to figure out some way to manage this. How do you deal with it? How do you classify people like that? Moreover, what do you do when they come back? Because it's also a phenomenon, even today, that I'll give you an example. Somebody might join the Jews for Jesus, and then after a year or two get his head on, and then come back. You get it? Now in America, things are much more fluid, and we don't have formal communities and rituals of re-entry and all that, but they tried to set these things up in those days, and they kind of did do so. And the big question then becomes, after the First Crusades, and will remain for the next 2 centuries, what is the status of the mumar and the apostate, and are they allowed to re-enter or not re-enter? Now, the folk feeling on the part of the survivors, which is perfectly understandable, is the heck with these guys. Get out of here. And the reason I say this is simple. If you are a survivor of one of these massacres that we described in unfortunate detail in the last 2 weeks, then basically you survived like they did in Hitler's time. Under a pile of bodies, maybe in somebody's cellar, maybe you disguised yourself somewhere, you slept out in the forest. Each case was crazy. And they went through great privation and suffering. Now, these 2 schnooks, they took the easy way. This is how they look at it. They took the easy way out, and they converted. Now, I know you and I, being liberal, nice upkeeping people, we say, I guess, don't judge someone else. I follow that. But on the other hand, I'm trying to take you into someone else's mindset. Here's a girl or a boy or a man whose whole family shechted themselves, as we saw last week, and did so willingly and heroically as they sought Al-Kiddush Hashem. And here are the 2 cowards. Right? There's Seymour and Melvin. They're the 2 cowards. And wait a minute. And they might be the 2 people left in the shul, or part of 12 people there. And Seymour always is all the way back there. And now he figures, someone's here. They're all gone. And there is, Moshe's widow. That's all you see. She is not sitting at my husband's place. You understand? And I know it's funny, but it's not funny. It's perfectly understandable. And I'm trying to tell re-entry issues. The day after a pogrom has its own issues. That's what I'm trying to show you. It's not only the time of the actual troubles, but it's what comes afterwards. And the popular consensus out there was that they want to throw these people out of the community and go back and stay Christians as you come there. And it's really tough. And I have no doubt, not having been there, and nevertheless, I have no doubt that there probably were a fair number of cases where somebody wanted to come back and the others said, get out of here. And he said, okay, I'm going. You don't want me? Shalom. I'll stay Catholic. The big rabbis, especially Rashi, who was managed to avoid all this, because Rashi doesn't live in this area, but right over there, right? Troyes is right over the border. She was near enough away. It's sort of like people lived in Switzerland during the Second World War. Right? They were in the safe area, but not far away was going on the Holocaust. So Rashi, in a famous letter, and Rabbeinu Gershom had said a century before, he took the position of once a Jew, always a Jew. Okay. By the way, this is not so simple. It's become a common statement among all of us, but it's in the history of halacha, it actually has its origins in now, in Rashi in the time after the First Crusade. That Rashi is the one who interpreted the Gemara, which says Yisrael af pi shalchata Yisrael hu, to mean once a Jew, always a Jew. So you and I have grown up with this sort of like we pick it up along the way, but I assure it's not so simple. And one of the famous, and it's not, and although to the layman these terms sound nice and peachy keen and all the rest of it, when you think through the consequences, it's not always that way. The real posek, shall I say, or the real strategic thinker has not only think the immediate consequences, but the long-term ones as well. For example, Rashi says over here very famously, chalitzas mummer, that think about what I'm about to say. If you tell me every person is Jewish no matter what, then if you have a situation of a Yavama, which could happen, especially in those days, how many young couples were killed or killed themselves? Lots. So here's a survivor, a woman. She could be 16 years old for all I know. Husband's dead. 3 brothers, the whole family's killed, except for, like I say, Seymour, right? Seymour converted, and that's a brother. He's a Catholic now. And he's a Catholic. He became a real Catholic. He's not going to give her chalitza. Whoa. So you're telling me now she's stuck because that jerk switched and became a Catholic. You get what I'm saying? It's not, don't give me the immediate, superficial reaction. Oh, this is nice, it's politically correct, and all the rest of it. The Gaonim, by the way, in Babylonia, centuries earlier, prior to Rashi, had taken the point of view that chalitza is momentary, that in the case that I just described, if somebody converts to another religion, he's gone. That it's not true that once you're Jewish, you're not Jewish. And I'm sure that one of the reasons they did that was to try to help the girls out. You understand? You have to keep that in mind as I proceed tonight. These controversies really kick up after the First Crusade and will rage for the next several hundred years, simply because there were other crusades and similar incidents which leave these things in the wake. It reminds us, those who are aware of it, of the many halachic issues that popped up after the Holocaust. Okay? The public usually isn't aware of all this sort of thing, but you don't have to have a vast imagination to understand that aside from the physical destruction that happened in the end of the Second World War, which is obvious, there was a lot of halachic destruction and problems that arose in terms of agunas and all kind of other business that emerged out of that milieu. So the same thing happens over there. There are what I would say in general tremendous Even Ho'ezer problems, marriage, divorce, yibum, chalitza, missing people. Correct? I mean, in the situation I'm describing, if the whole town was wiped out, and how do you know the husband's dead? There's no witnesses. They killed everybody. You see? On the other hand, every once in a while, some people escape, so it's not enough to say he was in that group, so therefore automatically he's dead. And these are the kind of questions that Rashi and others had to deal with over there. And what emerges over the next 2-3 centuries is this tension. It's not surprising this would happen between stringencies and leniencies. Those are Mekel and those are Machmir on these kind of areas, which become a basic feature of the Ashkenazic Pesach, right? Now, what I want to bring out before I proceed is, we're dealing over here not in the area of ivory tower study of the Gemara like they do in yeshivas today, where it's strictly theoretical and all the rest of it. They can do it, say whatever you want. We're talking about the opposite of that. We're talking about a time long ago when the study of the Talmud was connected with real life, what we call shalos and shuvas. And you don't have the luxury just to go and theorize, because here's somebody right in front of you, and what are you going to do about it? And they're banging at your door, and they're entitled to. Right? And they're entitled to. And so what do you say? And the pressure itself forms a basic part of the halachic process. I want this to be understood. That's intrinsic to what we call the responsa literature. So it makes it unique and particularly authoritative within Rabbinic Judaism. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, we find that many people, many poskim, many what we call rishonim, take stringent points of view of these issues. You don't know where the guy is, well, then tough luck. At least that's the way it's recorded. But you find other cases as well. And in the crazy environment that I'm describing, one finds, for example, one finds the following phenomenon. Some people who learned in yeshiva may be familiar with it. I'm pulling from the original place in Tosim Sachim, in Sanhedrin, in Ayin Dalet, where he's talking about over there the big three, Yeharg Val Yavar, those things you have to give your life up for. But it's not so simple. What does one have to give their life up for? Right? So you say, well, everybody knows Gila Rai Shvi Chadom, but there are many who've heard about that, adultery, or any kind of sexual misdemeanor, or bowing down to an idol, or committing murder. Not so simple. Right? Don't give me this stuff that you just heard. Not so simple. And here's material for a movie. They're discussing over there, this is the Sugin Sanhedrin, the part in the Talmud, which talks about the question of when you have to give your life up and when is life to take precedence over everything else. And everybody knows that most of the time in the Jewish religion, you save your life. Correct? I'll give you a classic example. Somebody puts a gun to your head, eat a ham sandwich, or I'll shoot you. Eat the ham sandwich. You know, that's well known. But sometimes not. And in this context, they talk about Gila Rayas, which is, as I say before, forbidden relations with others. What about Queen Esther? Didn't she sleep with Achashverosh? Right? Esther Befer Hesiav, and it was in public, and that's another reason to be. How'd she do it? And the courts back and forth. This is not the Queen Esther you usually think about on Purim. This is the Queen Esther of Halacha. Okay? You understand? But nevertheless, it's a fact. And to make a long story short, he says over here, Tiritz Rabbeinu Tam. This is something from Rabbeinu Tam, that's Rashi's grandson, who was the big rabbi I've mentioned him a number of times before in the 12th century. He was the big guy in France and in Ashkenaz in general, and a very daring posek. He was a multimillionaire, and he was a huge Talmud Chacham, and he threw his weight around, and people listened to him. Okay, and a lot of time he challenged the consensus, and he rammed his way through it. That's how big a person he was. And he said, "Tears Rabbeinu Tam the Ein Chayav in Misa al Biyas Goy Mishum Rachman Afkor Lazar the Nachri." That you have the question over here: do people rape, for example, or things like this, in which you have relations between a Jew on the one hand, and a victim situation, a Jewish woman, and someone who's not Jewish, to take an example. And this could leave all kind of devastating consequences in terms of being able to get back with the husband. And the Rabbeinu Tam, he said like this: let's be racist over here. Goyim don't count. They're not human beings. Therefore, anything that happens doesn't matter. Zirma Susim Zirmos is like animal. They say, yes, whoa, that's not 20th century. But it was 11th century. It was 12th century. And, no, wait a minute. Why is he doing that? Is he simply ranting? He's not. By the way, he was close friends with all the dukes and the nobles. You know, he lent them money. He was a very well-to-do businessman. And he goes on to say like this: Zirma Susim Zirmosam, as the prophet Jeremiah says, there's like horses. When we toch kach hayarotz Rabbeinu Tam lahatir bas Yisrael shehemira, and he says based on this he issued what in his day would be a big ruling that someone else wouldn't be able to do, but he said, I'm going to do it. As a Jewish girl, a married woman. Now I tell you again, you have here material for more novels and movies than you can imagine. Think about this: there was a bas Yisrael married woman. Shehemira, she converted to another religion, Christianity. Obola Nachri, and she hooked up with a guy. And they ran off. But she was married. She didn't get a get or anything like this. She eloped with a lover. But Shuvnis Gairima. And then she changed it. Listen to this. Then she changed her mind and wanted to come back to being Jewish. And she did. And she slept the guy with her. You understand? He was so much in love with her, he said, I'll follow you back into Judaism. In the Crusade time in the 12th century. He must really have been nuts over her, right? Because that's nuts, okay? And he did. Hold on for a second. That all sounds cute over here. Now, what happened? Now, here's all the stuff comes home. He said, then they comes to the Jewish court, and the Jewish community goes, whoa, wait a second over here. Wait a second. Well, hear this out. Aside from everything else, first of all, she was married. I'm not finished. But second of all, we have a rule. In Judaism, I'm sure many know, echad labal ve'echad labal, that if someone is married, a woman's married, and she has a relationship with someone else, then she can never get married to that person under any circumstances whatsoever. Now, even if the first husband divorces her or dies or this, that, and the other, this is in the Bible, it's in the Torah. He says that she can never marry this other guy. And Rabbeinu Tam says they can get married. L'kaim b'yadis, he says, you can do it. Why? Because he doesn't count. You say like this, but she says she had relations with someone else during a thing. Well, with who? With what? You get it? Now, someone else would say this today. So, oh boy, this is a Reform rabbi or something like that. And well, hold on. And the key point is what he did this for fun. These were real life situations in the crusading eras. You had crossing back and forth in identities. You had situations in which, who knows how she met this guy? I mean, it could have been in one of these pogrom contests. I mean, I wasn't there, but it's not normal. Anybody who's familiar at all with what happened in the wake of the Second World War, that they don't necessarily talk about in the books, will know what I'm talking about. Okay, these things happen, and the Ashkenazic rabbis like Rabbeinu Tam is the cousin, it's the uncle, it's the third. These are not theoretic, as I say before, ivory tower cases, but these are real situations, and they know the family and they know the anguish, and he was willing to make this point of it. By the way, his opinion was not accepted. The other Bali Tosas argued on it, and that was too daring for them. And this is not accepted in the halacha. Okay, but nevertheless, he said it was. Knows that where he was, they got away with it. And my point is that this bespeaks one little example of what was unfortunately a very common characteristic of this time, because it was a time of chaos and bloodshed and things in the wake of that. The most famous and remarkable example of what I'm talking about, I would say, in other words, the most famous example of the Ashkenazic rabbinic leniency from these centuries is something even more remarkable. The truth of the matter is, I wrote this up once in an article published somewhere, and I was going to bring it with me, and then I left the wrong notes at home. But I remember enough by heart to tell you that this goes back to the 1400s. So it's not the 1096. It's in the wake of the Crusades in Vienna. A little bit later in the Middle Ages, in the 1400s, 1422. And it was the same environment. And the Archduke of Austria, the ruler of Vienna at that time, had been friendly to Jews, and then he got married to a bad girl, and he turned on a dime, Albert V, and he attacks all Jews in Vienna. He burns 400 or 500 of them together in his wake. If you go to Vienna today, if you care to, they'll show you a place where it was. I think the Viennese like it, And then, in addition to what I said, in addition to killing all these people, tomorrow is Tisha B'Av, one of the most famous rabbis in Germany, the Trumas Hadeshin, Israelite. His parents were in this group, and they were killed in this Gzeira, as they call it, the Wiener Gzeira, the Gzeira of Vienna. And he was the biggest Rosh Hashiva of the 1400s. His students worshipped him. When he died, they wrote books describing everything he did from the time he woke up and scratched his ears till they put on film. I promise you. And it's very famous. They said like this: and when Tisha B'Av, he would sit down, divided by the fire on the floor, and then the students would all gather around, and he would talk about his parents' experience in the Holocaust and in the Gzeira 1492, how they were burned. You understand? This was like someone today would speak about something that happened to them in Hitler's time. It's very interesting. Well, in addition to all these people being killed, there weren't. Especially women and children were kidnapped and were assigned out to different houses in Vienna. And the idea was they should stay there until they convert. And so the family should go to work on them to try to put pressure on them individually to convert, especially the women. And it was I'm talking about something terrible. And it lasted for quite a while. And some women were able, again, you have material for movies, some women were able to sneak out and escape one way or another fairly early. Others had to be there 6, 7, 8 months till finally got their way out, and some were much longer. Get it? It's a real tragedy. Shine. That's half the problem. So they escape, or they got out, or were bribed and they got out. But now you come home. According to the Talmudic law, anyone who was captured among the Goyim, you have to suspect that they were violated, and I'm sure the Austrians probably did happen. And then the question becomes like this: is it under a force, or is it under, or did they seduce them, persuade them? It's an ugly side of life. And if it's the latter, then they can't remarry the husbands. And this is nothing new. And the Talmud in Ksuvas has all this stuff back from the Talmudic times and all that. You're talking about the Middle East. What it's like. The Arabs do this even today. And so it was a terrible business. And all the big Ashkenazic rabbis in that area in the Rhineland, they're debating back and forth the Maharil and some people you never heard of, Avram Katz. Yeah, can you allow it under this way or not under that way? And here's my key point. This one debated this and give this ruling versus that ruling. But what do you do for the poor lady whose husband is a Kohen? And the reason I say is because the rules for a Kohen are very tough. if a Kohen's married, any woman who under any circumstances whatsoever ends up having relations with someone who is not Jewish, I repeat, under any circumstance whatsoever, is also to a Kohen. It's not fair. It's what it is. And so whereas the other ones had a presumption that even if anything happened, it was done under, they were violated. But if a Kohen's wife, it wouldn't matter. And so, but you had X number of women who fit this category. And you're going to say like this, well, tough luck, especially someone who, the ones I'm talking about are heroes, because the ones who weren't heroes succumbed and became Catholics. Correct? They took the easy way out. I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just saying. The one I'm talking about, the ones, just use your imagination for a second to be stuck in a house with Austrian families. They're working you 24/7, trying to break your defenses down. And somehow or other I don't know how they did it, to maintain your fortitude, and then somehow or other you get out of there later, and then you come back as a tough luck. And we have the response on all this, and they said, well, there's no way. They tried to find a heter and all the rest of it, and they couldn't find a heter. It was a tough luck. And yet, from an extraneous source, from the Ramah, actually, who lived 100 years later, he tells something quite remarkable. We know this, and he says, B'Gzeres Österreich, when they had this persecution in Austria, in Vienna, they found some way to make that they could go back to their husbands even if they're Kohanim. They worked it out for everybody. So you can't do that. Right? At least you will tell somebody, there's no way. And maybe the women had some kind of special, witnesses or something like that, but probably not. And finally, the Ramah himself says, Hagadolim she'etiru lav midino, that these famous rabbis in Austria, or wherever it was in Germany, in Ashkenaz, as I was saying, in the 1420s, they didn't come from law, right? They weren't following the regular law. El mishum tzarech hashah, but they issued like emergency ruling, a special dispensation. How can you do that? Shiro, and they were afraid because they didn't want the whole families to get messed up. V'lachene kilo, how can you do that? And so what they said was, they retroactively annulled the marriage. This is something you hear about today. It's a big controversy. All the rest of it. They did it. Okay? And so what they said was they never were married in the first place. No, I'm not finished. They were never married in the first place, and therefore anything they involve with someone else doesn't count, and therefore they go back to husband. But you should immediately challenge me. It doesn't help if the husband's a Kohen. Because even if they weren't married, if the lady ever in her life had any relations with someone who wasn't Jewish, that by itself. Right? Listen to this. So Rav Herzog, famous rabbi and chief rabbi of Israel, writes that he once came across Rav Zalman Meltzer, the famous Rashiv long ago, and he said, I don't understand this. How you understand this? That he let him get married. And Rav Zalman Meltzer says like this. Hear what I'm about to tell you. They can't get married again. That's true. They cannot get married. But who said they can't live together without marriage? You understand? The halacha is that a Kohen can't marry. I repeat, think what I'm saying. Kohen can't marry so-and-so under these circumstances. That's true. So who said they can't? So without marriage. Of course, we ordinarily don't do that. But this was a special case, and this was Zalman. So what they did was they said like this: you can go back and be a family and everything but formality. Okay, this is not from some left wing. It sounds like from what should I say, Riverdale? I don't know. Right? But wait a second. But it's the opposite, isn't it? You're talking about the Gedolei Ashkenaz from when people were really religious, long ago. And so it's not coming because they're halakhic liberals or things of this nature. I'm serious. But it's coming because the people who were from that community, flesh of their flesh, blood of their blood, and who knew all the principles and knew all the people involved, and were Gedolei Yisrael. So they understood what the market will bear. They had this is what we mean when we use this term, which is bandied about so often, Das Torah. Something you need someone who's of a big Talmid Chacham, big stature, and is also at the same time, part and parcel of the community and and is of this business, this is a person you listen to, which is a perfect example of what I've been trying to hammer through in this entire course. That when it comes to Ashkenaz, we're always going to have the tension between book halacha and experience halacha, which is at the core of the Ashkenaz experience. You understand? I cannot forbear to share with you that we had a bris this morning we made over here from my grandson, and it's a Shavu Shechalbo. It's just before Tisha B'Av, and there's a halachic question. I won't bore you with too many details. A halachic question: can you take a shave if you're the father of the baby or something, or the sandik, on the Shavu on the week of Tisha B'Av, which is very stringent? And the general consensus from the book halacha is no. And the Chassam Sofer, he was Orthodox. The Chassam Sofer is like this. I come from Germany. Everybody did it. You see, in the Ari Franconia. Franconia is Bavaria. You understand? You talk about Würzburg and Fürth and all these are the old communities. You understand? He said, everybody, even Erev Tisha B'Av. And the other one writes to me, he said, but it says you can't do it. Don't tell me you can't do it. So we did it. You understand? And if they did it, so it's right. And what he means is, and then he says, and the Chassam Sofer, being the Chassam Sofer, he says, let's look at the situation. And you can be sure by the time he finishes with his response, he explained it, to justify and to thing, and he can do it because he's the Chassam Sofer. And my point is, that's Ashkenaz, right? Which is, as the expression goes, mipi sofrim and not mipi svarim. It's the Torah Shebal Peh, okay? The Torah Shebal Peh. He reminds me. He said, "Who was it? You told me somebody says the Mishnah Berurah, that's for orphans or something like that." That approach, which is very different than the one has prevailed in the United States of America and second for the 20s. I'm well aware of that, but I'm just trying to tell you how it was long ago, and these are concrete examples of what I'm speaking about. And so, keeping that in mind, the tension between what you find on the one hand in the normative literary sources, and on the other hand, the real-life halachic sources. And I want to repeat, we're not talking about some rabbi here, there, and there. We're talking about central figures. We're talking about great Gedolei Yisrael, who were authoritative figures, and were people who were the Das Torah. In those generations, you find very fascinating things. I spoke already in the past about the tension that lies concerning the issue of suicide or of killing children, right? In which the book sources say one thing, but you and I saw that all these communities just did it. And after you did it, then it's right. Right? Because like Nit and Lahayam, you're not going to tell me that they were wrong. And you find also, I'll share with you one over here in this context, very interesting one. And again, you'll be surprised, I imagine, to hear this. Yehard Val Yavor is the expression we use in the halachic terms for the idea of the big three, that the human life takes precedence except for big three. You've all heard that, I think, that you only have to give your life for Gila Arayas, Shvicha Dam Avodah Zarah, for idolatry, for killing, and for sexual impropriety, whatever. Now, really? Is that true? So everybody said, well, of course it's true. That's what I've heard ever since I'm a kid. But if you take the trouble... What do I do with the Sanhedrin here? Yeah, good. I was saying, thank you. If you take the trouble to look in the Gemara where it originally occurs in the book sources, so you'll find that, and I won't quote very long, don't worry. Talking about over here, the big three. There's Gila, Rice, Shvichadam, and Avodah Zarah. To you and I, we take for granted, of course, to worship an idol, that's definitely what someone gives his life for, right? And the Gemara says, the Talmud says, Avodah Zarah lo. Is it really true that this counts for Avodah Zarah? V'atanya Amar Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael is one of the famous rabbis, and Mishnah, one of the big sources. He's there at the time of the 10 martyrs. He's a colleague in Bar Plukta, as we say, a debate with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael says, Minayin shi marmel odam avodah zarah al tiharg, minayin shi yavrav al yaharg. Talmud lemar v'chai behem. So how do you know? Knows what's the source for the rule that if someone puts a gun to your head and says, bow down to an idol, I'll kill you, you bow down to the idol? And he says, because the Torah says v'chai behem. You should live by the Torah, not die by it. But not if it's in public. If it's in public, then you're like letting down outside, then you have to give it your life. So automatically, you find an opinion of an authoritative person who says that Avodah Zarah is not necessarily one of the big three. Not when it's bitzina, not when it's away from public view, when it's not seen by the Jewish public. That's interesting. Now, wait a minute. If you follow through, as one does, in the different places in the Talmud, it pops up again in Avodah Zarah. And again, I'm going to be very brief with this. And there it's Rava. Rava is a famous rabbi for a couple hundred years later in the Amora period. And Rava says, Hakoya b'chas lo savdeim, v'shapar lachas v'chai behem, yotza ones, yotza anvadar kasabach lo sechab shkotshi, afilu ones, habetzin of arhesia. Rava, who lives later than Rabbi Shmuel, says also that there's a distinction if they tell you to worship an idol, whether it's done in public or when it's not done in public. If it's not done in public, just do it. Okay? But if it's done in public, then you have to give up your life. This is shocking. It's only shocking that people don't know, but most people don't know. Tosfos, the ones who lived right through this period, this is well known to the historians, what I'm telling you. Tosfos says right away, listen to these words. L'chora mashma, it seems from this passage in the Talmud, the Rava Svirale, the Rava, who's an authoritative rabbi in the Talmud, holds the onus tzin elim sulatzmo, that if it's a case where they're forcing someone to worship an idol and it's not done in public, do it. Don't give up your life. So it sounds like, in other words, following the normal rules of the Talmud, where you follow the argument starts here and it works its way out there, and the later generations, all the rest of it, following the normal rules of the Talmud, it should be that Avodah Zarah is not something, I repeat, not something you give up your life for. Not like, and then Tosfos immediately says like this, the kasha, we have a kasha, and it's a problem. Usually when you have a kasha, they'll say, it's dialectics. They'll say, how can you say this? Elsewhere, it either says explicitly or implicitly something different. What's the kasha? Tosfos says, Chas v'shalom shenifsek Avodah Zarah yarkol yavar. Right? No, this is unthinkable. Wait, that's not playing by the rules of the game. You know, that's a kasha, Chas v'shalom, right? What I mean is, you're not offering an argument, you're offering an emotional argument. But that's what they offer. And because of that, Tosfos says you have to reinterpret the Gemara in such a way to conform to the idea that Avodah Zarah is, under all circumstances, something to give your life for. And why does he say it's impossible? Because everybody in the Crusades gave it their life for Avodah Zarah. What's it all about? Was it a big mistake? You understand? And there you have the tension, as I said before, between what's, somebody sitting back in an ivory tower situation and strictly theoretical and writing books about what the Gemara says or means in one case, and then you see the people on the ground, men, women, and children, in community after community, just said, well, it's for sure that this is what we're going to do. And as we all know, they all committed suicide and killed each other. And that itself is more powerful than any book stuff you're going to bring me. I'll throw another piece into it. Is Christianity as a religion of Avodah Zarah or not? The big debate in the Middle Ages. Let's put it this way. I think everybody here knows enough about Christianity. You don't have to be an ordained minister. So everybody knows enough about Christianity to know at the core of it, you have a certain contradiction. It depends which one you give precedence to. Christianity is a monotheistic religion. On the other hand, they believe in a Trinity. Now, is that a contradiction? To them, they work it out, however they work it out. You understand? Just like every religion, the Jewish religion has its issues, and we work it out. So they have this is something to them that they say it is monotheistic, but it's also Trinitarian. Okay? I don't know if it be Christians, I have to work it out. But on the other hand, it already presents the two possibilities of someone saying, do I give precedence to the monotheism side and consider the Trinity side less important? Or the other way around. The Rambam, for example, from day one, always telling us Christianity is absolute Avodah Zarah. He sees it as a Trinitarian religion. He says you give up your heart while Yahweh, give up your life rather than come to Christianity and forget it. On the other hand, he was very liberal in Islam. I'm sure many know that the Rambam wrote a letter during the Islamic persecution in Spain, and when he was young, saying that if they threaten your life, you can convert to Islam and then run away when the coast is clear. And the reason is because Islam is a fundamentally monotheistic religion. Christianity, on the other hand, is Avodah Zarah. You see? Now, by the way, that's not so simple. You may be surprised to know, later Sephardic poskim took the point of view that the Rambam's wrong. And the reason they said it was simple. Islam is not simply about Allah, about one God. It also challenges the supremacy of Moses. Agreed? They say Muhammad is the big prophet, the biggest. In fact, that's how they describe him. We believe the Rambam is the one who says it's part of the 13 Ikrim and Imamins. You have to believe the Nevuas of Moshe Ben Hoyamit is that he's the greatest. And so it's how did the Rambam work it? I don't know. Let's leave that aside for today. The Meiri, to take another example, a famous rabbi, he said Christianity is 100% fine religion, nothing wrong with it. It's just wrong with the Jesus business. But it's a monotheistic religion. It's well known, the Shita of the Meiri. So what I'm trying to tell you is somebody sitting back there like this, and he goes, should you give up your life rather than convert to Christianity or not? And especially with the ideas that when these guys leave, maybe you'll come back to Judaism. Someone says, I don't know, maybe the Meiri's right, Very vase. But that's not what happened, right? All these fancy opinions out there don't mean anything compared to what actually happened. Now, by the way, the Jews in the time of the Crusades, the intellectuals, were conflicted on the question of Christianity, but not for the reason you would imagine. The reason they were conflicted on this, and there are many books about this, is because if you remember what I told you, don't give me short-term answers. Think of the long-term implications of it. If you tell me that Christianity is really identified as Avodah Zarah, there's a Gemara, a Masechta called Avodah Zarah. And at the very beginning of it, there's a rule of Lifnei Eidayim. Some people have learned it in the Daf Yomi, which says that 3 days prior to and 3 days after a pagan festival, a Jew is not supposed to do business with anybody with paganism, because what it's going to do is make them happy, and then they'll go and praise their God, and it will encourage paganism. Shine. But wait a minute. Hold on. If Christianity is Avodah Zarah, then Sunday is the day of Dayim. So the 3 days before is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The 3 days after is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Guess what? You understand? And Tosas at the very beginning of Avodah Zarah says, "Bekasha al mes samcha olam." What does everybody rely on? That we do business with not people with these guys, these Christians. They lived in France and in Germany. That's what we're talking about. The Bali Tosas. They live over there. It's true that most of these holidays have to do with the saints. But nevertheless, I have an uncensored copy of Tosas here I'm reading from. No, I'm serious. These are not in the censored editions. You be sure when the Catholic Church got a hold of this in the 1500s, they instituted a big. If we go to Italy, if somebody, we'll talk about it, they went crazy on the censorship. But nevertheless, Tosas says, Mikol Mokum B'chol Shavua Yom Notzri Shalahem Yesh Lahem. Every week's got a Sunday, right? That's Yom Notzri. That's the day of the Nazarene, and so on and so forth. And they have to give different answers. They say because of Ava or for other reasons like that. Somebody wants to go into that more closely. Talk to you later. But I'm just telling you right now, these issues were there. The bottom line, they had to work something out, because if you're going to tell me everybody is over the Zarah, then don't live in France. Don't live anywhere in Christendom. The Rambam actually lived where? You understand? In Islamic countries. So you can say it's total Avodah Zarah, doesn't have anything to do with them. Don't tell me you're living like Rashi does in the middle of Troyes and say the people all around you have a den of Avodah Zarah, because then you better make sure that you have an independent source of income. But if you tell me they're not, then where does that go? Then let's put it this way. Then why can't I buy wine in the store? Correct? Why can't I buy wine in the store? You know that. Or to be more exact, why can't I do business with it? Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, has a number of books, including this little cutie, Yenom, which is all about, he's very interested in a very interesting phenomenon. He's writing about Ashkenazic Jewry in the time we're talking about over here, and he's saying that the number one business in those days, today I think the number one business is probably computers or something like that. Those days, the number one business was wine, simply because people in Europe didn't drink water, because the water is considered foul-tasting and poisonous, and probably was in a lot of places. The state of, I'm not going to give you details, but you know what went on in rivers and lakes. So the point of the matter is, everybody drank wine, and therefore it's your number one thing. And the Jews, who were businessmen and had to struggle every day for a living, if they could get into the wine business, there'd be a huge source of income, and they voluntarily took it as a cultural obvious. Even the biggest shegets among the Ashkenazi Jews said, but you don't deal in wine, you see? And he's just interested in that. But I thought you told me that it's okay to deal with them. And you see what I'm talking about, the tensions between the life on the one hand and the thing in the other hand. So all these are legacies that come out of the Crusades in the internal sense. It left a lot of loose ends around, which Jews had to struggle with in order to maintain their lives and try to put some order back into it in the wake of the terrible violence and the pogroms that had occurred, obviously, in 1096, and were to reoccur, unfortunately, later on. I would leave this point by talking about, for a minute, it's always my desire to do a little social history. Put yourself back to the degree you can in those days. Last week was the pogrom. Here's the guys on the street, live down there and there and there. They killed your brother. They attacked your wife. And so on and so forth. Monday morning, it's all over. They're back in the store. They're back in the grocery store, buying milk. And what are you going to do? What can you do? Right? But you can't do anything. You understand? Now this is almost the worst part. I won't say the worst, but it's one of the worst pieces of the whole thing. Right? Here's a Jewish lady, and she sees this guy, and this and this and this is what happened, and now it's over. And what's she going to do? You get it? The Jews are helpless. You understand? It's easy for us in America to shoot the mouth off. What are you going to do? This is the real part. They try to pick up their lives the best they can, but as I say, it's the same customers on Monday morning. In the broad sense, the Crusades had long-term negative consequences for the Jews because, and this is scary what I'm about to say, in terms of current events. The first crusade led to the second, the third, and the fourth, and so on and so forth. What happened in the short term was, as maybe you can see in this map over here, they did conquer part of Israel. They set up something they called the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, roughly the size of the state of Israel, a little bit more. I won't give you all the details because they're endless. When they continued fighting to capture Jaffa and then Haifa. But the point of the matter is, they set up a Christian kingdom over there. The theory was they'll take over, make an all-Christian kingdom. Not enough Christians ever came from day one to make a go of it. And so the majority population was already Muslim from the beginning. And in the beginning, they killed a lot of Muslims. They killed a lot of Jews. But after a while, some Jews, were just there, you see. And this is the way it was in Palestine. But the other Muslims were constantly fighting, as they try to do with Israel today, to try to drive them into the sea. And eventually, they started having some military successes, and this made them go and appeal to Europe for more crusades, and they did do more crusades, one in 1147 and a very famous one in 1189. And when that happens, so the Jews are not the target, but they are the collateral damage, and that's the problem. Get it? When you have two teams, the Christians and the Muslims, A and B, when the passions get aroused, and either of those teams, ipso facto, it ain't good for the Jews. Right? That's the way it is. And that's really how it was. The Crusades really, as you saw, had nothing to do with the Jews whatsoever. It had to do with the Christians fighting the Muslims, trying to hold on for territory over there. But in order to charge up the troops, you had to send guys like St. Bernard and others talking all over France and Germany. And what are they going to say? You know what they're doing to us? And you're going to take this? Christians united. Let's kill all the non-Christians. Now, I'll say it. They don't have in mind the Jews. But it's going to happen. You see? Everybody in town gets a .22, a shotgun, and they all go and get drunk. And they all start singing songs. They're walking down the street. Don't be there. Right? He said, they're not looking for you. I know they're not looking for you, but don't be there. In Germany in the 1930s, they used to have a bitter joke. I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes, but it was something like all the Jews fled, running over the border. And they said, why to run over the border? I think they said like this: a lion ate a kid, and they're looking for the lion. They're trying to hunt the lions. They said, what's it got to do with you? He said, before they get their lion, they're going to shoot all the Jews on the way. You understand? That's what it is. And so, why do I say this is this terrible relevance to contemporary politics? Because we live in a time, in the year 2011, in which the Muslim side has been heated up for a long time. The Christian side has been very cooled down for a long time. Now, as you see in Norway last week when the guy shot everybody, and the Christian side is starting to heat up. It's also true in America. A lot of what fuels the religious right, not all, but a lot of what fuels the religion is fear of Islam. And I don't blame them. I'm just telling you what's happening. It's not an irrational response. I repeat it, it's not an irrational response. There's a jihad going on over here. But and the people that are charging up the Christian right I honestly think, I don't think they're anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, but it doesn't matter, does it? When I say it doesn't matter, I hope I'm wrong, but the heating up of the passions in and of itself doesn't have a good history for the Jews. You see? Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't counter-react. They're going to. But we better watch out. That's what I'm saying. It's Erev Tisha B'Av. It's a time to be sober. The Jews in general have been the butt of increased Christian passion. Now, wait a minute. The Jews in our lifetime have been continually the butt, down till today, of increased Islamic passion. That nobody said anything about because we gave up on that. Okay? People get fired up over the religious, but they won't get fired up over the Islamic, right? That they give, right now, the news like I do. There's a huge wave of this fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism sweeping a lot of the world, and the Jews are among the targets, and that's just the way it is. You're not going to change that. What you say is, I just want to keep it over here and not over here. So the Crusades, which have to do battles between the two teams, and its effect on the Jews, its collateral damage, is scary. By the time you get to the Third Crusade, I'm just running through this very quickly, in the late 1100s, it got bad for the Jews. Okay? And the French king, who became the king of France in 1189, Philip Augustus, became the king same year in England, basically, for one reason or another, got so swept up into the stuff that they turned on the Jews. Philip Augustus directly, Richard Lionheart indirectly, but it doesn't matter. The Jews took it on the chin anyway. And there commences, as a result of the passion engendered in the Crusades, a process which takes several centuries, which ultimately results in the complete and total expulsion of the Jews from Europe. Okay? This is a process that starts first in England. So it starts in the wake of the First, Second, and particularly the Third Crusade, as I said before, which is late 1100s. Then it just gets things going until by the late 1200s, the Jews are kicked out in 1209 by King Edward I. Not too long afterwards, the King of France, following in the footsteps of Philip I and Philip II, Philip III, kicks out the Jews from France. Next thing you know, they're gone from the Netherlands and from this place and that place and the other place. And so I could just, if you really care to, there are maps that will give you the dates of when the Jews are expelled from this place and the other place. But by the time you get to 1500, late 1400s, there are almost no Jews anywhere in Europe outside of Poland. They talked about last. They all ran away to Poland, to Eastern Europe, which was a huge empire at that time. But Germany, Italy, France, Western Europe, as we call it, Spain and Portugal, of course, and all that area, Scandinavia for sure, zero Jews. Get it? No practicing Jews, and the Jews had been there for a long time. And what happened? Historians generally will say like this: you have to look at it as up to the Crusades and from the Crusades on. It wasn't the Crusades, as I tried to show you specifically, which did it, because they were just individual cases of very terrible violence, right? On relatively small scale, but very bitter. Nevertheless, the heated passion and excited feelings of the Christians in general, especially spurred by the clergy, the monks and the nuns, have become very powerful and very, very active in the 11 and particularly 12, 13, 1400s, ultimately results in a consensus which goes like this. Everybody should be the same. All of Europe should be Catholic, period. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody was on the same page? There are always going to be two competing dynamics out there. One is going to be the multicultural dynamic, and the other one's going to be opposite. There are some people that say, I love walking down Manhattan. You see 10,000 people. Here's Chinese, here's African, here's American, here's this, that. It's great. If I want a bagel, if I want a Chinese food, it's wonderful. You know what I'm saying? And there's another person that walks down and says, oh, wouldn't it be great if the whole Manhattan was exactly like me? And you can understand both, to be perfectly honest. You can understand both. And so that feeling is awakened by the Crusades. It takes a while for it to kick in, but eventually it does kick in. And as I said before, it results in the expulsion of the Jews totally from Europe, which is why they all end up in Poland. By the time you get to 1500, there's a handful of Jews left in a few places in Germany. It's highly exceptional. I'll give you an example. Frankfurt is a town, for one reason or another, the Jews were never expelled from. But there are very few towns like that. When we go to Italy, there's not a single town in Italy at one time or another that didn't kick the Jews out. On one occasion or the other. And it's in the other countries. I mean, it was just a given.
What was happening in the same time with Sephardic Jews?
That's a different experience. The Sephardic Jews. I don't want to go into that now because it'll take us too much time. I actually did that 2 years ago on the thing. They have a different experience. when they're expelled in 1492, they go to different places. But they can't go to Western Europe. They can't, not if the Turkish Empire. It's a different thing altogether. There remains, and with this I'll conclude, to talk about Israel, which is very rarely talked about because we know very, very little about it. Eretz Yisrael was captured by the Crusaders. As I said before, they set up a Latin kingdom over there. Each duke and baron was given a shtickle karka. If you go anywhere in Israel today, there's still left over the castels, as they call them, left over from the Crusader times. And the duke and the prince and the knight is the total ruler of the people of this area and acts that way. And were there any Jews there? Like I said before, most of them were sub rosa, hidden. They weren't really there, but they are there. There weren't enough Crusaders to really put in the kind of police state that they would like to have. And so the result is it just was de facto a native peasant, a Muslim and a population with a tiny sprinkling of Jews, but not in Jerusalem, it seems to be. At least officially on the books. I don't know what happened in reality. The Jews are expelled. There can't be any Jews in Jerusalem. They let Muslims in, officially, but not Jews. And this will mean a long period from 1099 to 1187, almost a century, when there are no Jews, at least officially, in Yerushalayim. And then, as you know, Saladin, the Muslims retake Jerusalem, and when he does, he allows the Jews back in simply to show, I don't know exactly why, but it seems simply to show that he doesn't hold for the Christians anymore, they hold for the Jews. And second of all, the Jews had been on his side from day one, simply because the Jews were suffering more under Crusaders than they were under the Muslims. You get it? Saladin was, by the Islamic standards, an enlightened ruler. The Rambam was his son's doctor, so in other words, he had to do with Jews and things like this. And they were talking about Jews who were very Arabized, of course. And they weren't looked upon him as a foe, as an enemy. And the bottom line, he lets him in. We have, and as I said before, there's Erev Tisha B'Av, so I'm going to share this with you. We have nearly an eyewitness account of the re-entry of the Jews into Jerusalem in 1187 in the wake of its seizure by the Crusades. Namely, a famous Jewish poet who visits the city very shortly afterwards. My favorite poet, Yehuda al-Kharizi. I know it's a household name, but nevertheless, it ought to be a household name, right? And in my opinion, he's a fantastic poet in Hebrew, and he writes a very celebrated poem, one among many, in which he talks about visiting Yerushalayim immediately after its, its liberation, its takeover by the Muslims. But it's not so simple, because the Jews tear each other to bits. You understand? And he starts with a very famous peroration. He says, I came to Yerushalayim, Nafshi Letzim Misfard also, my soul rose from Spain, Nafshi Letzim Mi Ma'amakim Mashchakim Golsa, from the depths to the heights, Gil Hirbas Ayom Rosa Harel Ayom. Well, I'm not going to bore you. The point is that he goes on this, I'd love to read it in Hebrew, because his Hebrew is wonderful, but I fear that I will lose too many people, so I'll read it in a wonderful, and if anybody wants to afterwards, I think he's a great poet, what can I tell you? But if you want to see it afterwards, but there's a great translation, and so I'll read it to you in the translation of a professor from Oxford who took the trouble to write the English, really the way he does the Hebrew. It's a work of art if you appreciate this sort of thing, and it's about a page and a half, so bear with me, and I'll skip the poem that he says when he came and beheld Jerusalem, and he was like all blown away. Isn't it a shame we live now a time where you fly to Yerushalayim it takes 10 hours. Once upon a time, a Jew saw Yerushalayim. It was like unbelievable, right? And he says over there, when my song and prayer were ended, I rose from my bended knees. It's going to rhyme a lot. I rose from my bended knees to walk about the city, afire with grief and pity. Lifting my eyes, I saw the temple's inner court, there where the heathen came to rip out the candelabrum and light a pagan flame. On I walked, feverish and weak, tears sluicing each cheek like streams cascading from a mountain peak. At length I met a citizen, a Jew in other words, who said, You have a foreign look, young friend. Do you come from exile's end? Yes, I answered, and I would question you if I may. Surely, he said. Say what you want to say. When did the Jews return here? When the city fell under the Arab sway. But why had the Christians driven us away? Well, they claim we shamelessly killed their God, who did then disown us. If we sacrifice the abominations of the Egyptians for their eyes, will they not stone us? By what grace, I continued, did you re-enter his sacred place? How did you get into Jerusalem? God, the Lord, zealous for his name's sake, had pity on his namesake, saying, It is not right that Esav, that's the Christians, seize Mount Zion's tents, and that yet Jacob be driven hence, lest the envious nations scoff, saying God has driven his firstborn off, setting the divorcee's child, his firstborn above, preferring the son of his beloved wife over hers, whom he does not love. So, 4,950 years since the first day's light, God raised the Ishmaelite ruler to fight, Saladin, granting him the spirit of counsel and might, so he marched up from Egypt with his minions liege, and against Jerusalem laid siege. God gave it to him to have and to hold, and he told the city's dwellers young and old, Dabru alev Yerushalayim, speak to the heart of Jerusalem, let all the sons of Ephraim who dwell apart, yea, all of Egypt's serious remnants, speed like the hart, meaning all the Jews can come and move here if they want to. From every corner come, build you your home. And so here we be, by blessed calm approved, unless we be suddenly removed. For we fear the evil that here befalls, the rapine and the violence within these walls. And he's not talking about Arab to Arab. The churning contention and burning dissension which defies comprehension. For the cruel leaders of this community are masters of impunity. The Jewish community has set us up, is terrorizing the members of the Jewish community. Each the next man's stumbling block and pain. How shall we remain? They seek their fellows hurt, each one. The son his father, the father his firstborn son. It's Jew and Jew. Yet father and son together do not falter to gather kindling for the pagan altar, which means that what they unite in is to keep the fire of the machlokis going. Within each chest curls a poisonous snake. Nothing is done for heaven's sake. With shouts and bitterness the streets are rife. Each eye is a lance. Each tongue is a knife. I called the city Even HaMachlokis, the stone of strife. And leaders aside, there are yet others who pit brothers against brothers, rogues and liars. Each one spreads his net. One draws a mighty bow. A third conspires. A fourth prepares contentions, altars for new fires. So let us pray until God Almighty heeds and rids us of these noxious weeds. Let God fill our lungs with salvation's breath, lest he rid us of this death. And then he complained a little poem, which is as I said at the beginning of tonight, it's so sad we have to say this. He says, the guy said a poem in Hebrew, which comes out to, shall we tempt God with stubborn reprehension? All wounds have cures, but who can cure contention? All sins the Lord forgives, except dissension. And so, that's basically the end of it. Which means that the Jews were permitted to enter after the Crusaders were driven out, but then starts Israeli politics, right? And the Jews, they're back in, tore apart. So here we have a visitor from Spain coming, and physically speaking, it's great that the Jews are back, but as we all know, Tisha B'Av has to do with Sinas Chinim and Machlokes, and as long as that goes on, there'll be plenty of speeches that are going on for the keynotes. So with this, I conclude what I wanted to share with you about the first crusade, and it came and it went. Its consequences are really long-term rather than short-term, although there were short-term consequences in people's personal lives. The long-term is very sobering, because the long-term is that it, as I said before, stirred elements within the native European populations, which, when they played out in such a way that there's not room for foreigners. You circle the wagons. You want only your own kind there, and if the Jews don't comport with that plan, then they had to leave. So the Jews in the Rhineland had it good for a long time. I don't say it was perfect, but they had it good for a long time. And the law and order and everything held. But when it was put to a severe test, which is called mob rule, then it broke down. And as I said before, here's the day before Tisha B'Av. This is a sobering experience. Nobody should say, "Oh, it's where I live is wonderful and impervious and impregnable, and situation is beyond cavil." Thank God it's been so far, and I hope it continues. I'm not looking for trouble, chas v'shalom. But the person, as was said at the very beginning by Bernie, we study history to study man. History is not about places and battles and things. It's about human beings, and it shows you the extremes, how great people can be and how the opposite. We should all merit that we should only live in situations where people behave on the civilized end of the spectrum.